Yeah, thanks for joining. If folks can help with minutes, that's always appreciated. How about we start off with any announcements?
Sure, I have a couple. OpenJS World, it's always great announcements. We opened our CFPs. Deadline is February 14th. So please get those in. If you have questions, we will be having a sort of like an Ask Me Anything that we're pulling together. We have one from last year, and we also have a CFP mentorship channel on Slack. So please reach out if you have questions on how to submit a great CFP. And our Thursday, our OpenJS World Program Committee is meeting. So if that's something you're interested in helping as we continue to shape the event, please join us. That's on the public calendar.
Great. Any other announcements or anything of note? Just looking something really quickly here. Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, we will get into the agenda. Folks on the call, don't forget to add yourselves to the minutes. And we moved license, check, support, and tooling to the top of the list to take advantage of having Shubra here to talk to us about some Linux Foundation tooling. So this is issue 815. I don't know if you, Shubra or Robin, how you want to do it, if you want to present or talk or whatever you want to do, the floor is yours.
I'll let Shubra run with it. And Michael, you please weigh in on helping set some context. Shubra runs the product team for the Linux Foundation, including LFX, which is a tool you all may be familiar with, lots of great resources there. So, and Shubra used to be part of the Node Foundation for many years, so he's an old friend. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, good to see familiar faces again. Yeah, Joe and Michael, I think we have spoken in the past, right? So let me see if I can share my screen. And before I do, so, calculating like which packages use what licenses, what are the upstream dependencies, it's kind of comes back to what the software bill of materials is for an entire open source project. So we had multiple initiatives, and I'll probably show you all that we have been working, right? There isn't a silver bullet solution yet, but I think there's a good chance we can collaborate. And I'll tell you what we don't have, right? So
I think also it might be worthwhile to just give you a little bit of the context of, I'm looking right now, the Node.js project has 201 repositories. And we have a second organization, which is PKGS, and it has like another 10, 20, I don't know. So the reason I opened it in the first place is not necessarily the full, like the bill of materials side of things. It's just that we've got a large number of repos. We add new repos. And so even the license at our top level, do we have one in all 200 of those repos? Is it one, we moved over a repo, and so as part of that move over, we take a look, but did we get that right and make sure that it was one that's on our approved list? So it just made me think, this is probably a common problem for projects. And so it's not managing the license for all their dependencies. That's another separate bigger problem, but the simpler problem is, how can I be sure as one of the maintainers, all of these 200 repos has a license, it has the right license, and when I move one over and we make a mistake or something, or somebody creates one and we don't quite get it right, that we quickly find that. So it's sort of in that context, what kind of tools are there? And hopefully it's, it's the reason we were saying, like, maybe this is a Linux Foundation thing that can help us, is like, this is going to be a problem for every single one of the members of a foundation. Certainly for all the OpenJS ones, because we say, here are acceptable licenses, and I guess if it's outside that, we should know that. So all I was looking for was like something that I could point to Node.js orgs, and it would tell me all your licenses are good, or these are the ones that you don't have one, or you've got one that's not on the list, or whatever. So I'll let you go now. I just wanted to sort of put that as the context for this very specific discussion because it's more constrained than that whole software bill of materials issue.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thanks for setting the context, Michael. It's very helpful. And I'll tell you, like, upfront, the things we have been building, we don't have the entire solution, but I think we can get there. So let me share my screen. Are you guys able to see my screen okay?
Yep.
So at the LF, like internally, we have, and again, this is kind of, we are inviting other project maintainers to come and so these, do these scalability of the project. We use this tool called Project Control Center internally today, and you can see all the projects are in here, right? Like 700, 800 projects at the LF. And I think even if you look at OpenJS under the OpenJS Foundation, these are, these are all the projects that we have, right? Now, in these projects, we have a bunch of services or tools that we can just turn on or off. One of the tools is security. Now, we didn't have like one just for license checking, but when we turned on the security scanning, we did actually, as one of the key functionalities we got there was like licenses that are used by the core package as well as, based on the manifest file, if you traverse down the application path, what licenses are used by the packages, including of transitive dependencies. Now, I'll show you what that data looks like. What we don't have today is, Michael, what you were mentioning around like a policy engine, right? Now, I've been thinking about like, hey, is it time to write a policy engine? It's not hard to build. And I'll also share the source code for this. But, just as an example, right now, if I click this security tab, what we do is like, you can see here, we have an onboarded OpenJS, but if I search for another project, you mentioned like, 200 plus repositories, right? And if I look at like security for this, yeah, little load. This is just the admin portion of it and how to set it up. But then I'll show you what results it's produced. It's pulling up like all the repositories from, Hyperledger probably has 1,000 repositories, right? So this kind of takes our time a little bit to load. But once you set it up, I'm going to show you one example here. So this is a project that we wrote called EasyCLA that many projects actually use to enforce a CLA agreement, right? And so if I look at these dashboards, I've already bypassed, there is a gating mechanism to this, but if I look at, we do collect all the issues and, if you remember this log4j that happened, right? Like we use a lot of third-party scanners behind the scenes. One of the scanners we use is Sneak. Now, Sneak doesn't actually inspect source code. It typically looks at like your manifest files, right? Your package.jsons and pulls down all the dependencies from there. And then you start looking into, the entire dependency tree and all dependencies and any of these dependencies that might have issues going on, right? So one of the key things here is think about this EasyCLA is my core package, but in my core package, I am basically pulling down other packages like serverless framework is something we use behind the scenes, right? And if I say, okay, in this serverless framework, I have like in strip ANSI, there is like a vulnerability, I can see that, right? Or I can see what that vulnerability is, CWE, CWE, and like how to remediate all that. So that's okay. That's basically what you're getting bonus. You don't have to necessarily use that. But I think one of the functionalities we have within this tool is license detection. So here you can see, whether it's OBSD, Apache 2 or BSD3, whatever license are used by that repo, right? Which is basically, and it could be a group of repos, right? So what we do is some aggregation farming. So it's not just one repo at a time, like my EasyCLA project, it's probably using like 6, 7, 10 repositories. And then if I look at like, okay, let's look at, as an example, Apache 2.0. And which all packages in my application stream am I using Apache 2.0? And I'm saying, okay, these are like the serverless components that I'm pulling down. And in that serverless component, how am I actually pulling down that module? The reference is in this particular package.json. So that's where, like I'm referencing that third-party module in my case, right? So we traverse the tree and you can actually download that entire report, right? There's well, I probably don't have access to this, but basically that download reports lets you pull down all the licenses and the associated packages and the manifest files, which actually refer to those in one kind of a spreadsheet report, right? So this is kind of bare minimum that we have. We do scan the code base, the source control itself. And these are based on pattern matching, so I have some pattern matching that I've set up. These are based on regular expressions, and I'll show you how we do it on the configuration side. But in this case, I'm pulling down things like code secrets, or I'm also scanning the code base and pulling down things like non-inclusive language, right? So things like master, blacklist, whitelist, dark, and whatever. This is actual source code scan, right? The SNCC stuff that we pull down, issues and dependencies and licenses, those are not based on source code scan or static code analysis. Those are purely right now, at least, based on manifest inspection and reverse application mapping. But we do pull down the licenses in each repository, or if you have repositories within repositories embedded, we do actually discover. So there's that discoverability part, right? So today, now what you don't have, which Michael was what you were pointing at, is if I look at these licenses, right? And say I want to set up some kind of a policy saying in my core package or any of the dependent packages, if I am finding I'm just making stuff up, right? LGPL, whatever version, right? Should I trigger an alert? That part we don't have. We have an alerting mechanism, and these scans run on a daily basis. So if you look at, and again, we have kind of stepped back and we are working with projects one at a time. So we are working with ASWF or Cloud Foundry or CD Foundation, LFAI, or for example, this is ASWF, and you could have one repo, you could have sub projects. Think about this concept, if you think about CNCF, it has 100 sub projects, right? Kubernetes being one of them. So each of those projects, we basically say, okay, what is the repository groups which are mapped to, for example, OpenQ. So let me pull this thing up. So here's an example for Hyperledger, right? And we look at okay, this is the repository. There are 146 repositories under the main package and 14 under the -CI/CD package and whatnot. And then what we do is we actually install a bot, right? It's that bot is installed with administrative privileges, and that's why we have not tried to clone it. We actually work with the maintainers to install the bot. Because we cannot, right? You need to have admin permissions on the repo. And once the bot is installed, it starts scanning. And you can decide okay, out of these repositories, you can see I don't actually have the bot configured on everything. I can just selectively go and say, okay, for these ones, I want to turn on the bot or not turn on the bot, right? So here you can clearly see the security bot is not configured, but it's more like a GitHub app that you install, and it starts scanning and producing the results the next day. Makes sense? This is kind of one core tool that we have. And we have been collaborating. This is more like an open industry collaboration. We have worked with SNCC for the security scanning, licensing. We have worked with Blue Bracket for code secrets and non-inclusive. Now we are working with the Microsoft folks with CodeQL, SML, where we can actually pull in static code analysis data as well into this single governance plane. Okay, so that is one. The code base for this is in two places. One is under, we have an LF engineering repository, but we have been open sourcing this one by one. So here's the LFX engineering repository, and you can see we are basically putting all the scanners in there. So the license scanner, we still have to do it, but I think we should be done in the next couple of weeks, right? The other part I know it's probably not deep focus, but I wanted to mention is we basically created an SBOM generator. Again, it goes and works with the SPDX framework as the backend. We'll probably add other frameworks like Cyclone DX or whatnot. But we do support multiple languages and multiple package managers. And it's a CLI-based generator tool. which obviously runs on any platform, but you can essentially point at a GitHub org or basically a set of GitHub repositories, and it actually creates the entire package description and what packages are being used, what licenses are being used in that project. But again, this is more like a CLI tool. It's not an actively scanning tool, right? Which runs on a container kind of thing. Makes sense. So this, and obviously you can put it into a Docker image and whatnot, right? And we actually, again, the same thing here. To create the bill of materials, we go and traverse the entire dependency based stack, right? Based on whatever package manager is used behind the scenes, right? So I can share this URL with you as well. It's used to be called SPDX generator. We have now just renamed it OpenSBOM generator. So these are the two efforts we have been doing, but let me pause there and have you guys ask questions, because I think, Michael, clearly what you asked for, the policy engine is something we don't have, but building a policy engine with rules in there is not a heavy lift, right? Because we already have the daily scanning reports and everything.
Yeah, my first impression is, though, that the scanning you do is not like, it's good, but it's a different use case than what I was talking about. Like, that's the use case for, hey, I'm an end user. I want to scan the full depth of the tree to understand, am I, what licenses are being used and so forth. My use case was the simpler, we're a maintainer, the foundation has approved certain licenses, is all at the top level. So it doesn't matter to me what's in our package at JSON, because we're not pulling that code into our repository itself. It's the license that I'm putting in at the top level. Is there one, and is it one that the foundation has said is does it meet what we've said is our limit? Is it the one we should use unless we get an approval from the board? So I think Jordan's mentioned he's got a tool that does that. So I'm just I don't see it as an extension to the license checking that you showed us, but it would be another check that would be useful as a maintainer to say, okay, I want to look at my repos across my org, and basically, the view you showed us there, that's what licenses are being used in the tree is interesting, but if GPL shows up in there because of one of the dependencies, that's not the thing I'm looking for. I'm looking for for all my repos, are they all green in terms of they've got a license and it matches one that's on our list?
Yeah, and that's essentially what I meant by the policy engine, because you need to define some policies in there saying, okay, these are the set of permissible licenses and these are not. Now, in openness at the LF, there have been a couple of people on our legal team. Steve Winslow used to be one of them. He used to use tools like White Source and to basically create those license package reports at the code level and based on the policy compliance, right?
But those still, all those tools that I've seen, they all are looking at I'm going to scan down through the tree, as opposed to I just want to look at an org and the repos. I think Jordan has his hand up too. So
right.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think there's really three main groups, and there's probably more, but at least three main groups of use cases. One is I'm a consumer and I want to know stuff about my dependency graph for reasons. The other is I'm a maintainer of one or more projects and I want to know stuff about the projects I maintain. And the third is I manage an organization but don't necessarily maintain every project within it. So it's a corporation or it's something like Node or whatever. And I want to make sure that all of the disparate repos in my organization match some sort of policies. And I don't know exactly, I have a guess, but I don't know exactly which one of those or ones of those your tool is more optimized for. But it sounds to me like what Michael wants is more the third case. I have the Node and Package.js cords. I don't care about individual repos necessarily, but I want to make sure I don't have to care about them. my tool is explicitly designed for the second use case, which is I maintain multiple projects across things. But I think it could double for Michael's things, and I have no attachment to whether it solves Michael's problem or not. Like, meaning if a better tool solves it, great. If my tool solves it, great. But yeah, just kind of, it's probably useful to clarify those sort of user story use cases. And if there's 4 or 5 or 6 or more, like, or, you know, great, we should document those somewhere. But like, because that would probably help understand the usefulness of all of our tools and projects.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're spot on. So this kind of aggregation of what projects are, what repos are under a particular project, for example, right? Like if you're looking at CD Foundation or just Cloud Foundry, this is not an individual user. This is essentially what's mapped under that Cloud Foundry org, right? So these are those 563 repositories. Out of those, we have scanning 121. So there is the list of all the orgs, but yeah, absolutely. Like Michael, what you are looking for, that part, like that policy management and all that, we don't have today, right? That being said, just one note before you look at it. So there is a couple of things we do here. I'm gonna just show you in terms of like, yeah, go ahead.
I'll just add that, Jordan's characterization is exactly right, because there's other things like, do we have a code of conduct link in every repo?
Right.
That equivalently is like, we got a whole bunch of repos. Do we have the things that we've said we'd have for each of our organizations without even caring actually what's in the repo itself?
Yeah. So this is basically the other part that we had. Again, these are not saying this is perfect, but like, for example, right, like we had a set of keywords that we basically, when we triggered the scanning, it's not just for the vulnerabilities and the licenses, but also like actual keyword that you can find in the code, right? Remember I told you about the the things like white hat, insane, man hour, mankind, those kind of keywords, which we think about are in non-inclusive language. Now think about it like if you had a pattern that you are matching, right? Like based on the source code, if there's a license.md file, right? So we have the ability, but it's not productized in a way that you can consume it today. Okay.
Right. So, I think you're right. This is an equivalent thing. You may want to scan for this. It's like Jordan said, you're not a maintainer, but you want to check across them to.
Yeah, exactly. So here, when we set up these keywords, I'm basically triggering the scan of 500 repositories and creating an aggregate report at the org level, right? Or it could be multiple orgs, right? But most of our reporting, we do it at a project by project level. So it could be like an Angular report. It could be a Node.js core or Node.js, whatever app, or Express.js package level reports as well. Okay. So that's kind of, what I had. So I'm not, my main thing is like, is there a way we can collaborate to build this, right? Like we have 2 capabilities. We have the license detection at the core as well as upstream. The second capability we have is for scanning the source code for keywords, right? Just think about it. Those are the 2 capabilities we have. Now, if we have some kind of policy enforcement or like some kind of rules engine where we can say, hey, this is a permissible license, this is not, and, trigger an alert, that is something we can build relatively quickly and add it as a functionality. But that will take some time, right? In openness, like it will probably take us like 2-3 months to build. Okay. But in the short term, if you have a CLI based thing that, Jordan, you have built, I'm pretty open, like we can purpose that for the short term as well.
Because I guess like the generic capability to be able to say, have somebody within the project log in and say, for the repos in my orgs, here's what I'd like to check. And like one of them could be the license. Then you could see extending that to like, do I have a code of conduct? You could see extending it to whatever list of things like that. Right. That framework seems useful within what you've got there. And then the back end, like Jordan, I haven't, in the last meeting, I tried to run it a few times, but I haven't looked at it since then. But if Jordan already has something that does most of those checks, I don't know why we wouldn't reuse that and then try and put it behind the place where you can log in and run those reports and show the data and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And the initial scope of the tool was like for like branch protections and all the little checkboxes and twiddles in GitHub's settings. And with a stretch goal of eventually adding support for checking files and stuff. So like my personal wish list includes, I want to be able to check, do all my repos have the same GitHub action workflow files from the same reusable actions? And do they have branch protection set up with those actions and things like that? So like it doesn't currently support checking files like licenses and codes of conduct, but so it would need to be added there as well. But the framework exists just like it does on the dashboard.
It already has defined point at the org, find the list of repos, go through the repos.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
I know we had a similar problem where there was like something on our wiki, the default wiki was editable. And so, I ended up writing a small tool and going through and fixing a whole bunch of checkboxes on, but that's a similar one where, and there's been at least one other one where I wrote a tool that, went through and scanned the things and looked for some GitHub config. And it would be nice if there was just a go here.
And I mean, I also had these exact same use cases when I was managing the Airbnb GitHub org. And, it's nice to be able to say like, yes, all of the wiki editable checkboxes are off. For sure,
and even having it in the tool where there's a predefined set you can choose from, that can help you know the ones you should look for, right?
Emily has their hand up again.
Yeah, two questions, possibly for, I don't know, both Jordan and Shubhra. One is that, are you looking at all at, or I don't know, does GitHub expose the results of their license scanning that they do? And can we kind of do cross-validation that what we are scanning in a repo is also matched by what GitHub is reporting, effectively to ensure that at least, it shows up, right? And then the second question is, how about repositories that are monorepos that hold in themselves multiple packages that can and are published separately on, for instance, NPM. Can we do license checking for these as well as the repo as a whole?
Right. Yeah. So the scanner that we are using today, we handle the monorepo use case. So it doesn't have to be, coming in from package.json dependency per se, right? So we do have that. And I'm not sure, I've not checked on the GitHub public API, whether I'll be able to get the license file across that particular repository. If that is an open API, we can definitely validate that, right? Right now, yeah, so, that's that. But I think in terms of, let's say you add an org and additional repos get added, right? You don't want to go back again and turn on, turn off stuff. So the auto discovery part, what repositories are inside a package or basically what licenses are within a repo. And then if you add another repo to an org, it should be auto discovered and added to that list. That automation we have built, right? So that's a slightly unrelated one to your question. But did that make sense?
And then, yeah, for mine, it's so I've remembered now. We do check the license because GitHub API does report it. It's whatever they've detected and displays in the sidebar. That's what the GitHub API reports. That does not, I believe, support monorepos. So thus, my tool doesn't either. But it would be a relatively difficult but trivial extension to once you've located a repo that has package JSON files not at the root, you could spider through them and look at the SPDX identifier in the package JSON or something, whatever heuristic you wanted. But my tool is likely going to largely stick with what's available on the GitHub API.
Yeah, so I think what we are looking already is the SPDX identifier. And that's why we are able to, inspect those monorepos today. Yeah. So I don't know what the next steps are. I do need to run for the next meeting, but would it be okay if we maybe, do an we don't need the whole group, but maybe, we collaborate, and I can have some of my other lead engineers in there as well, Jordan and Michael, and we can, think this through how to like come up with a solution. Because I think there are multiple moving pieces. We have some, you have some of them don't exist. Right? Make sense?
Yep.
Okay. And just FYI, right? Like all this scanning we are doing, it's, like for any project which is associated with the Linux Foundation, we are basically any scanning cost or whatever, there's no cost associated. It's all, we are doing it for free, and we are open sourcing. I'll send you the repo links as well, where we can cross collaborate. Okay.
Great.
Sounds good.
Great.
Yeah,
Thanks,
very.
everyone. Yep, I'm going to jump with Shubhra on that next one. And Brian, I know, is covering with some other action items. And of course, Joe's got it.
Sure. Thanks to both of you. Thank you, Shubhra, for coming in and discussing this. I think it was very informative, and we can figure out paths forward.
Awesome.
So right. So I guess Subra, you'll send out an invite for a follow-on or something like that as a next step, right?
Yes, I will.
Okay.
And
Sounds
who
good.
needs to be on the call? Michael, Jordan, who else would be valuable?
I would send it to the CPC mailing list and just say like whoever's interested.
Okay.
Okay, I'll help you with that, Shubhra.
Awesome. Cool.
Thank you, Rob.
Okay, thanks.
Great.
Thanks.
Bye.
Great. Cool. I would have, I think that was informative. If we didn't have such a light agenda, I would have maybe time boxed it a little bit, but I think that was good. So thanks to them and to everyone. Cool. That being said, let me find the agenda again, and we can kind of roll through the rest of the stuff. Oh, look at that. Somebody was taking great notes. Thank you very much. Get something extra in your stocking this year. Brian, we have you on the call. The next issue on the agenda is the Summer of Code. You want to talk to us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're getting into mentorship season and internship season. I put out an issue on the repo. Basically, if there are any projects which would like to consolidate their application underneath the OpenJS Foundation, certainly happy to help with that and help organize it. I also put in there, I know there's some projects which apply on their own, and that's totally fine and totally encouraged too. I think the big question really on my end is just, locating people who are both, willing to submit projects and people who are willing to mentor. The other thing that I would bring up here as well is that this is specific to the timeline of Google Summer of Code. There are, of course, others. There are mentorship programs which are run through the Linux Foundation as well. Ultimately, I think the question really is, which one do we have folks to be able to mentor, and where do we have interesting projects? So if you're interested in doing this, or if your projects are interested in doing this, just drop a response on that issue. I set a deadline of, I believe, the 27th. I'd have to go back and take a look at it, which is the date that the application period opens. Basically, after that point, we need to be focused on assembling the application, making sure we have good responses. So if we don't have any responses by then, I'll assume that projects are moving forward on their own. And that's everything I had on that, unless there are questions.
I don't have any questions, but I'd like to try to dig into this further and see how we could take advantage of this if possible. Either at the foundation here or Node or wherever.
I assume
Definitely.
like the main difference between somebody trying to join a project is Google provides some funding for the mentee.
Yes, so there are. So basically at a high level, Google provides funding for the mentee. I believe there's also a mentor stipend as well, although it's reasonably small. The idea here, though, is that this would take the place of a summer internship. And if you were watching it last year, they had changed the program a bit, and it was the mentorship programs were basically cut in half in terms of timeline. This year, they're going back to the original length of projects, which is effectively full summer break, and then also including the option for smaller projects. So there's a bit more flexibility this time. I think one of the concerns last time was that the projects just weren't long enough for people to commit to an entire summer.
Mike Samuel?
Yeah, just for the notes, the deadline you mentioned was February 7th. Is that right?
Let me just check and see. I need to check the issue. Going off memory here.
Yeah, it says, I'd like to recommend the following process. Please add any ideas or indicate willingness to be a mentor and comments on this thread prior to February 7th, which is when I think it officially opens up. It says February 7th to February 21st is application period.
That's right.
Okay. Yeah, I wonder about this for Node and the work that we're trying to do in the website redesign stuff. I just don't know if we have the ability on the mentor side and any of the sort of getting things ready and defined and, be ready for success on something like this.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the other side of this is that there are different ways that we could be thinking of the proposals here. I mean, it could be something specific to one of the projects. It could be something general across all of the projects. It could be something specific to the CPC or to one of the working groups or the collaboration spaces. So there really, in my experience in the past, there hasn't really been any limitation on the scope, aside from the fact that it obviously has to be for the benefit of an open source project.
Right. The challenge, I guess, is the mentor time commitment, I guess, right? Because we could probably come up with things that say, so I'll just use a concrete example. So on the Node API team in the Node.js repo, we have, a whole bunch of good first issues helping to get the additional tests for Node add-on API. We also have a weekly meeting. So we've actually had mentees through our own mentorship program who've come in but really the only mentorship we provide is that 1 hour meeting. They come there, we can provide questions, and they've been able to be pretty successful that way. But my guess is that doesn't meet the mentorship requirement for this kind of program.
Yeah, that's just looking at past projects which have done this. The projects that are successful are the ones that are able to assign, not assign, but somebody volunteers to effectively be the lead mentor for a given mentee. And other people do pitch in and help. But really, there are multiple checkpoints that are involved here. If somebody needs to put together the guidance for the person who's coming in, they need to be able to evaluate them multiple points. And at the same time, the mentees themselves are expecting to have somebody to engage with because they're choosing this as opposed to a different summer internship. Everybody who comes through this program, they're all college students. So, they would be looking at the various different options that they have and wanting to know that they'll get something out of it.
Yeah. Okay. So that was my impression. I just wanted to make sure that it's not a way we could fund people who want to work in the project, which would be nice, but it's almost like it has to be like they're joining an organization where there's a manager or a tech lead who's going to help them through it, which is where we'll struggle, I think, to get people.
Yeah, that's a great clarification. I would just point out that if the goal is to do something else, Google's season of docs is not limited to college students. That's general tech writers for open source projects. If there were, if we were looking to have somebody come in who wasn't looking at this as as an internship, there are other ways to fund that as well.
Yeah, when does the season of docs start? Because that's another one that came to mind for me.
As I recall, the application period I think is in August in past years, and it runs for a bit longer too. It's definitely aimed at being outside of the school year.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's kick this around, at the foundation level and also in project level and see what we can come up. Thank you, Brian. I appreciate it.
You bet.
Cool. All right. With that, we'll move on. We got about 14 minutes left, which is fine. The next issue, if I was reading that correctly, is add dates and reminders to the biweekly CPC meeting template. We created this a couple weeks ago out of the work that we're doing on dates and reminders. I added it to the templates. Michael or whoever else is on the call who could take a look at that and approve, that would be great. I'll drop it in the chat here and put it in the notes if need be. Let's see. So that should be good. And then we'll have this, nudge in our meeting minutes to check the dates and reminders so that we're aware, with plenty of advance notice on anything like elections and things that we need to, manage in a timely manner. So that should close that once we get that landed, I suspect. Clarify requirements around COC violation is next. I believe that we have a working session set aside to look at this more closely. I'm just trying to get to the agenda here. That would be February 8th. So the next working meeting we had set aside to look at tech strategy and review candidate repo content. And then that would be January 25th next week. And then, the following working session we have set aside for clarify requirements around COC violation. Does that satisfy us for today, or do we want to talk about this issue any further at the moment? Cool. I will just put a note here. Have a working session planned for Feb 8, I believe that was. Great. I'll move along on the agenda here unless anybody stops me. Feel free to jump in. Issue 756 is create proposals for the community fund. I commented an hour ago we that the last working session we worked on this, and I'll drop this link in the chat. We created a community fund repository and started to outline the programs and initiatives. Feel free to look at that repo, browse what we have written. It was really a first stab in an hour meeting, trying to take what we had outlined in that document from a previous working session and putting it into a repository. With some, bike shedding and organizing and whatnot, and naming. Note that there are a bunch of open issues. I tried to capture all the things that we felt like we didn't have the time to further flesh out in that 1 hour. So feel free to jump in there and, help us there or comment. We can have some discussions in some of those issues. As we flesh out. In fact, most of them are titled Flesh Out X, Flesh Out Y. So feel free to take a look and comment and whatnot. Any thoughts or comments for that one while we're here? If not, I'll keep moving on, which is our last issue. List documents maintained by the CPC. I noticed that Toby opened a PR this morning no, that's not the one I was looking for, to move this along. There's it's the one that he had opened, but changed it from a draft to, an open PR, which now I'm having trouble getting actually to it. Why doesn't it link to it for me? There we go, maybe that will do it. No, that's not what I wanted. Oh, I'm sorry. What am I thinking? This is the pull request, isn't it? Yeah, 789 is now not a work in progress, and I think Toby added some stuff to it this morning. So I don't know if anybody has any comments on this, but I would encourage folks to review it, and we can kind of move this forward. I don't know if this is considered complete, or if this is, an initial take on this document that will list the documents that we are managing. Anyone, anything? If not, that's fine too. Feel free to take a look at that repo, that pull request, and see if things look good. And if you have a moment to see if that makes sense in terms of its completeness, that would be great. I will re-review it as well. Otherwise, I believe that we already have, let me just put a note here. Toby has removed the work in progress, prefix, and draft status of this PR. We have set aside the next couple of working sessions already. This is another kind of item on our agenda of sorts, is to just figure out what our working sessions are. So I'll just reiterate that next week is the tech strategy. The week after that is COC violation clarifications. And we can, figure out more beyond that as we go. I also wanted to just quickly check the dates and reminders. But otherwise, I think we're about at the end of our agenda here. So if anyone has any comments or questions or anything, feel free to speak up.
I got one. Calling back actually to the repository and license and so on discussion, I realized I have a question that I hope is theoretical. What's our policy on dependencies that are vendored in to our repositories for whatever reason? Are those allowed to have any license, or do those also end up needing to have a license from the list of our approved licenses?
Good question. I don't know. I don't know if Brian or Michael or anyone really have any thoughts on that, or their experience in previous in other orgs and such.
Sorry, what was the question again?
If
dependencies that are vendored in so that the code is actually present in our repository or one of our repositories, but isn't copyright us, but is copyright someone else. But we need it there because, for example, it's not on NPM for whatever reason.
So, we do include dependencies which are not copyright us, right? In say Node, but we have to give proper attribution for the copyrights and or licenses that are applied.
Yeah, that's clear. My question is, we have a policy for what's okay for stuff that's in our repositories regarding licenses. Does this apply or not apply to vendored in content?
I think it should apply to things that are vendored in. Like those become part of our licenses. And so, they are like, because they're in our repos and people, I guess, it's maybe not, it is, it's going to get complicated because there'll be cases where like it's not shipped with the product. So if it's a tool that's used to build, that might be a different set of rules than if it's like something, the code that we actually ship in the product itself. So I guess the question is, like, I don't have an answer off the top of my head for every single case. If you have a specific case, we might be able to help, but
no, it's a theoretical. Thank you.
I think it's like in general, if it's a license that's in that list that we have for the OpenJS Foundation, great, you're good. If it's a license that's outside of that, then it needs some more looking at to say, well, is this okay? And that's the second problem that I didn't bring up in the initial thing I had about just making sure our licenses are okay. But every time a new license gets pulled into Node, we also have that discussion of like, well, is this okay? Should we be pulling in that dependency or not? That kind of stuff.
I'd concur on all of that. It's a great question because effectively, if you're vendoring a dependency, you're distributing the dependency. And so my interpretation of that would also be that whatever the IP policy is for the project and whatever the acceptable licenses are under that would also extend to dependencies that are, being rendered by the project. And it brings up an interesting question of how do you detect all of those, particularly in situations where people are using snippets of projects. I'm aware of commercial tooling that will scan for that. There's a substantial amount of overhead that's involved in actually evaluating those reports. But it can be incredibly effective, just basically looking for slices of code, because sometimes the dependency is one that's there explicitly because it's not being distributed somewhere else. Sometimes the dependency is there because somebody found something that was useful and just brought the file in and maybe didn't declare it. So typically what we would say, in most of our projects, these are issues that a lot of companies will deal with as they pick up the code and scan it before they in turn distribute it themselves. At the same time, it's something which is worth writing down as a policy to establish expectations so that people don't do it in good faith. And good faith, but incorrectly.
Okay. Great. Thanks for the question, Emily. We only have about a minute and a half left. So unless anybody has anything else, feel free to speak up. I'm noticing a bunch of our PRs are failing because of some broken links. So I'm going to fix those real quickly. I'll try to get that in and then rerun all of our tests to get to be able to merge in our other PRs. So look for that as well. Feel free to take a look at our issues and our PRs in the meantime. And hopefully some of you folks will have time to join us next week for our working session. That'd be awesome. Otherwise, thanks for attending this session. Always happy to see you all, and see you around soon.
Thank you.
Talk to you later.